take my mask off behind the podium?
Yes. Oh,
Ah, sweet. All right. Do you want me up there?
Take it off entirely.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Can't understand anything.
Well, welcome everyone to our 193rd Coffee and Conversation. Unfortunately, we've been having a little trouble with our streaming capability, but we'll certainly have this recorded and uploaded onto our website. But we're so fortunate today to have Adrian visit us to tell us a little bit about his service in the Navy. I'd like to highlight, though, a couple upcoming talks that we're going to have. Next week, actually on Halloween Day, Tracy Perry's going to be our speaker. Tracy's been a coffee and conversation speaker with us multiple times, all with very interesting stories about his, well, one was his uncle in the Philippines during World War II, another was a great-grandfather who served with the Michigan Regiment during the Civil War. Also about General Doolittle, who Tracy's very interested in. Tracy was an Air Force veteran and served for many years also as an air traffic controller. So he had a very particular topic he wanted to talk about. And this was in October 1970. The Wichita State football team was flying out to Utah, I think, for a football game in two different planes. They landed in Denver, and then for the next leg, for some reason or other, they split up. One plane kind of flew north and kind of head toward Utah that way. The other one tried to fly over the mountains here. And lo and behold, that second one didn't make it. So Tracy's going to talk about that particular incident, the investigation which went on, and what we learned of that. And unfortunately, all too often, we still have planes who have significant trouble once they get into our mountain areas. So that'll be our next one. And then on Veterans Day, we're going to have a special program here, which will start at 11, hopefully kind of outside initially, and then for the remainder of the day with some reenactors and special exhibits and refreshments, we'll have an ongoing kind of a party, if you want to do that, to just recognize the importance of Veterans Day. And then the 14th, Ryan Wolf will come back and join us. Ryan actually spoke with us on 17 October about the global war and terror veterans, our new generation of veterans, and what it means to them and some of the challenges they're faced with now as we try and reintegrate them into our society. But anyway, Ryan wanted to come back and talk to us about a historical issue, and specifically how the World War I Armistice agreement continues to shape our modern world. And all you have to do is look at the Middle East and you see all sorts of the continuing impacts of those original decisions. And then just finally on 21 November, Tim Hutchinson will come back. He's our Broomfield Veterans Service Officer, and Tim will give a further update from the VA with whatever changes that have been occurring due to the coronavirus pandemic. So again, without further ado, Adrian, please.
All right. Okay.
And yeah, you can take it off.
Cool. All right. Thank you, Mike. First of all, can everybody hear okay? I'll do my best to talk loud. I haven't done anything like this in a long time, so hopefully I do it justice. I appreciate the introduction, and thank you all for having me. I'm gonna attempt to make my stories about life on a Ticonderoga class cruiser very interesting. So before maybe we get into that, just kind of tell you a little bit about my background. So my parents were both in the Navy back in the 70s. My dad was on submarines, so he did nuclear power school, and he was on the USS Flasher, and he met my mother when they were going, I think they were stationed together in Newfoundland, of all places, and she was, this is probably the very earliest times they were letting women in, and she was doing a job, I think with radar technician or radar services. I'm not 100% sure. She's told me 1,000 times, but I don't remember what it was. But they met in the Navy and then obviously later married, had 6 kids. I'm the second oldest of those 6. And my older brother's a Marine. My younger sister, who I've got a picture of here. Does this advance the slide forward?
Sure.
Awesome. Yeah, here we go. So this is the top 3 of us. That's me there on my commissioning day. What you see behind you is a little bit of Barton Hall, which is the ROTC building at Cornell University. That's my younger sister, Andrea. She went on to be in the Naval Academy. So she's in her midshipman Naval Academy gear there. And she was a nuclear officer as well. And that's my older brother, John, who at the time was a Marine already in service. So that's those are the first 3. And then my younger brother also, he went and enlisted as a para-rigger. And I feel like there might have been more. Oh yeah, and then my other younger brother's a Marine still, and he's in Morocco right now. So it's hard to keep him on track. So anyway, so I come from a military family, I guess. And there was never a lot of pressure on us to join, but it just felt like something we all wanted to do. And my brothers and my sister and I, we chose the ROTC route because it helped pay for college and all that. So that's kind of how I ended up there. And when I graduated in 2002, I went on to the Surface Warfare Officer School, which is a 6-month ordeal of fun in Newport, Rhode Island. That's where it is. And so after that, I reported to the USS Monterey, which is what most of we'll be talking about today. So this is a side picture of the USS Monterey, CG-61. It's a Ticonderoga class cruiser. And what I was hoping to do today was just kind of go through my experiences on board, but maybe start by talking a little bit about the ship itself, in case anybody's curious. Obviously, the new generation of cruisers look a lot different than the World War II and even the Korean War version. So there's kind of a lot of interesting stuff to look at and to see. So, just stats-wise, I want to say it's about just shy of 600 feet long and something on the order of 9,600 tons of displacement. It's a twin-screw ship, so there's 2 propellers on back and powered by, I want to say, 4 gas turbines. So deep in the engine room, there's 2 gas turbines powering one shaft and 2 gas turbines powering the other shaft. What's sort of unique about this one and the purpose of this class of cruiser anyways is it's part of what the Navy calls the Aegis weapons platform or the Aegis weapons system. And its centerpiece is this thing called the Spy 1 Bravo radar. And everybody knows about, you drive by the airport and you see the radar on the dish and it spins around and, sends out a beam of energy and then it can tell you where the planes are. So all around the superstructure of the Monterey are these octagonal or hexagonal panels, and that's the actual radar itself. So instead of having a rotating dish, they put a panel on all 4 sides of the ship and they can steer the beam electronically. So the inside, you can't tell from this picture, but inside there are hundreds of little cells, and each one shoots out a beam of energy. And so they can very finely control where they want the radar to go, whether it's above, below, out and about. And the official stats, probably still can't even talk about how far it can really go, but it's part of a ballistic missile defense system, so I'll just leave it at that. It can see pretty far. And at the time that I was on board, it was the most powerful tracking platform. So we could not only track, if ballistic missiles were coming inbound, we could also track civilian air traffic, naval air traffic, inbound missiles, even things as small as inbound large projectiles, things like that. And you could manage all that on a screen and kind of keep track of where everything was. So that's the power of the Spy 1 radar, and that's what the whole purpose of a Ticonderoga class cruiser really was. So on the next, we also have conspicuously missing are any guns, which is kind of odd. I know people look at it, where's all the weaponry? So if you look at it from overhead, the most obvious weapons platform we have are fore and aft 5-inch guns. And it's nothing like the days of World War II when they had 16-inch guns, but they're still fairly robust naval weaponry. I think the range was something on the order of 15 or 20 miles. So they could still do damage from a distance. And then if there's a white box that's right behind the 5-inch gun there, and that's what they call the VLS, or vertical launching system. So inside there are the Tomahawk missiles and the Standard missiles. That's where the real armament of the cruiser is. So there's a big box there and a big box there, and I think all told we could have carried 120 or something like that, standard missiles or Tomahawks. And if you think about it, Tomahawks, they can have all different kinds of payloads, one of which is nuclear. So it could have had as many as 120 nuclear missiles on it, which we never did, but that's the idea. So the real power, the real teeth of the cruiser are right there. And then another, again, it's kind of hard to tell, but these are I think those are the Harpoon missile launchers there. So the Harpoon's an anti-ship launcher, anti-ship missile. So it kind of shoots off on a sideward trajectory as opposed to going straight up. And then somewhere in here are torpedo tubes. I can't remember where they are. I think we only had 6 of them, 3 on the port side and 3 on the starboard side. So that's the main armaments. I can't really see it too well, but you might be familiar with, I think it's right there, and the other one will be on the other side. But are you guys familiar with the Phalanx weapon system, or the big Gatling gun with a R2-D2 looking dome on it? We had 2 of those, and the Navy doesn't call it the Phalanx, we call it the Suez for a close-in weapons system. So we had 2 of those, and that's a missile defense platform. All around it, there are mounts for, I think we had probably half a dozen 50 cal machine guns and 40 millimeter belt-fed grenade launchers that would be for small boats coming to attack, sort of a defensive perimeter. And that really kind of came about, if you guys remember the Cole that got bombed in Yemen, that was a small boat that came right up alongside. And up until then, the Navy didn't really recognize that as a big danger, so they didn't have a lot of training on how to defend yourself against a small, fast-moving attack boat like that. So now they put 50 cal machine guns and the belt-fed grenade launchers and things like that, so that you can create that force protection zone around your ship. So we also have sitting out there is one of the H-60 Bravos that we deployed with. It's the Navy's version of the Black Hawk. So it's kind of a all-purpose utility helicopter, and we deployed with 2 of them that can kind of fold themselves up, and they would get tucked into a hangar that was built right in there. So that's kind of, I'm just going to go down my list to make sure I didn't forget anything, but I think that's the major nuts and bolts of it. Does anybody, before I move on to kind of what it's like to be on one, do you have a question, please? Speed, yes. So I think on our best day, downhill, tailwind and all that, maybe 24 knots. Maybe 24 knots, I'd say. I think you could ring up 30, but I don't think we ever got to 30. So somewhere between 24 and 30 knots, probably max. Yeah, that's right. You ma'am.
So it's a weapon on water. What weapon could take that out?
Quite a few. We were always worried about. I think it was called the Sunburst, which was a hypersonic missile that Russia and China were reported to have. Mostly, I think the threat was probably an air threat or a missile threat. Hence the Sea-Wiz. The Sea-Wiz, the R2-D2 looking Gatling guns. So inside there is a radar and a fire control system, and the radar will, when it's active, it'll just be searching for anything coming in fast at the ship that it thinks is a target. And just as an example, to test it, some poor pilot flies a Learjet with a mile-long tow cable, and then there's a drone at the end of that. And so they paint the drone with radar, and then as the pilot flies across the pathway of your ship, then the R2-D2 thing will shoot it, just to test to make sure it works. But that's the main protection that it has against that. And then the Aegis radar platform, the spy radar, is really designed to detect anything that's incoming that's very far out, so that you can maneuver around it if it's a ship, or deploy one of those anti-aircraft or anti-missile assets against it. So we never had any threats, so I don't know. Yeah.
Your 5-inch guns, are they aimed by radar also?
I believe so. I don't know that it's radar. They had a fire control system. So I was never in the weapons department. I was primarily a ship driver, so I didn't really get deep into the workings of it. But what I think they did was, they used a radar to locate the actual target, and then they would line up the 5-inch gun, and it was gyro stabilized and everything. So the ship could be doing this, but the barrel is going to be perfectly steady. And then they would shoot a round out and kind of range it. They call it a walking in the rounds. So they'd see where the splash hits, and that's going to show up on the fire control radar. And they say, okay, we're maybe 10 meters short or something like that. And then the next one will be closer, and they'd walk it in like that. So it's not a perfect, it isn't like there's a radar lock and you shoot rounds at it. But I think when the gunner's mates were going, you could shoot close to a round a minute. So if you got 2 fore and aft and you got them both going, that's a round every 30 seconds, which did happen one time. I'll talk about that later. In the back. Yep.
What, besides the aircraft carriers, is there something on the range of World War II battleships that the Navy has, or is just the biggest ship besides aircraft carriers now?
Size-wise, once you get out of this cruiser size, then you have the amphib class, and they're all different sizes. They're bigger than the Monterey, smaller than an aircraft carrier, but they're not battleships in the traditional sense. They're troop carriers, and they carry the Marines where the Marines got to go. So I think the idea was the concept of parking your battleship offshore and then lobbing rounds in has all been replaced by something missile-ish, right? And the same goes for modern naval combat, which is if we're 5 miles from each other, we've all done it wrong. There's going to be a missile deployed, and we don't want to be close to an enemy warship if we can help it. So I think that's kind of the rationale behind that. But you won't see, to my knowledge, in the Navy anything like the battleships of old. That's kind of they just moved away from the idea of projectile weapons into more the missiles that can be steered and tracked and more accurate and that sort of thing. So, hold on. You had a question for a while. Yeah.
How many people on that?
Right. So full complement when I was in was 430 plus, something like that. But we never deployed with that many. That was everybody. That was the maximum possible crew complement. And I think we might have deployed with 360, 370 people. So it just happens. People get sick. Various people get transferred in and out. We just never had. Always felt shorthanded. But that's about say somewhere in that 370 to 420 range is about the number of people. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, you kind of touched on it. The surface-to-air missiles.
Mm-hmm.
Are those the vertical missiles that are in the front and the back?
Yeah. So we had what was called the Standard Missile. And the Standard Missile was a surface-to-air, and it was sort of an all-purpose missile. You could program it to do a bunch of different things. So when we deployed, I think we only had a handful of Tomahawks, probably 20, and I think the rest were SM-2s, surface-to-air missiles. And they would have just been tucked in there right next to the Tomahawks, in that cell. And then it could have been a Tomahawk, could have been an SM-2. Only the captain and the gunner's mates know what's what. But that was. Yeah, they were in there, and the Harpoon was the anti-ship missile, and that was on the outside of the ship, and that just flies out of a tube and then heads toward another ship. Cool, good questions, you guys. Anything else you guys are curious about? Just from a yeah, please.
How many cruisers are there under U.S. flag?
I was hoping somebody would not ask me that. I don't know. I mean. Yeah, right. Yeah, I can't talk about that. I honestly don't know. I mean, just to give you an idea of so I was part of what was called a Desron or a destroyer squadron, and we were the only cruiser in it. And I think there were 5. It was us, 5 destroyers, and a handful of frigates, maybe 2 or 3, and that was it for the destroyer squadron. And I'm not sure how many of those there were at Norfolk, but it's probably something like that. There's probably a ratio of 5 destroyers to 1 cruiser. So I don't think there are that many. I don't think there's that many. But I don't. The true number I don't know. I'm sorry. I wish I did. Cool. Okay. So that is the boat or the ship itself. And back to its mission a little bit. So the reason you have a cruiser to begin with, in today's Navy, a lot of it comes back to that Aegis platform and that spy platform. So what we were part of that destroyer squadron, and certainly the cruiser is the biggest ship in the destroyer squadron, but I think we sort of came to think of that more of as what's the mission and what's our purpose. And our purpose was mainly air defense coordination. Because we had the big radar that other ships didn't have, we would provide that umbrella of air defense for the destroyer squadron, and then when we deployed, we would provide that for the actual aircraft carrier, in my case, the Harry S. Truman. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that was the mission. So that's the main bread and butter of what the Monterey did, and there's a ton of other stuff that I'm probably even forgetting half of the missions that we did, but that's really why we have a cruiser in the Navy. It's because it can launch Tomahawks and provide air support, provide firepower, but also because it provides the air defense umbrella for other operations. So when I checked in 2003, I started as the repair division officer, which is a lowly engineering job that is not very fun. But the idea is that you get to learn the engineering systems, you learn how the plant works and how the gas turbines work, and it's a good training ground just for you to get to understand how ships operate. And part of that is firefighting. So we were in charge of all the guys who did firefighting and maintaining the firefighting systems, consolidation, holding and transfer, CHT, or the sewer system of the ship, fell under our purview. So we had all the really cool jobs at first. I could tell you stories about that, but they're not very pleasant. And so one of the first interesting things that we did, when I checked on board, the ship had just come back from deployment. So everybody was kind of decompressing from their last deployment, which again was to the Arabian Gulf, they usually are. And so the ship had a port call up to the Mardi Gras in Mobile, Alabama. So we took the ship out off the coast of Virginia, around Florida, up the Mississippi into Mobile. So that was pretty cool. And then sort of after that, there was a little bit more training, and then the ship went into a protracted yard period where we had to go into the shipyard and do maintenance. Probably got a couple new engines and some other things. And one of the major sort of interesting things that happened in that shipyard is Monterey became one of the very first smart ship platform boats in the Navy. And smart ship, hard to describe. Basically, like you've all seen those World War II movies where they ring up an engine bell. It's like all ahead full, so somebody cranks forward that engine order telegraph, and then sends a message back to the guy down, and he's sweating down in the engine room, so he cranks his over. So that was how things were going up and through the 80s. But as computer technology evolved and it was easier to get Microsoft Windows to do things, they started writing software and programs where they would send a sort of a drive-by-wire system. So now you would, instead of ringing up that engine order telegram, you just click it with a mouse and say, I want to go all ahead full, and then correspondingly the computer down in the engine room will do that. Huge. I mean, it doesn't sound like it would be, but it was a huge undertaking to program a Navy ship to do that. So ours was one of the first that I think the contractor was Raytheon, but I'm not sure of that anymore. But they came on board and installed all the smart ship stuff. This will come into play later. Remember this. So as you can, as most of you have familiarity with the government and the military, you can imagine how smooth that went and how perfect that deployment was. But anyway, that was a big deal for our ship. So kind of put a spotlight on the Monterey a little bit and changed the way we learned how to drive it, changed the way that we operated the ship from a day-to-day basis. So kind of an interesting thing. So most of my time as repair division officer, we were either in the yards or doing small operations outside of the Virginia Capes operating area. And one of the coolest things that we did as a destroyer squadron was called a SINC-X, or sink exercise. And they towed an old barge or something, probably bigger than a barge, but an old boat that they were going to decommission. They towed it out into the middle of the Atlantic and then cut it loose, and they let us shoot at it for a day, basically. And so we lined up as a destroyer squadron, and if you could imagine, in front of us were a couple destroyers, and then behind us were a couple frigates. And I think destroyers have one 5-inch gun in the front, and then frigates have a smaller, I think it's like an 80 millimeter cannon or something like that. So they start, everybody's like taking pot shots at this boat that's 15 miles away. And then it was probably the best, it was one of the neatest exercises we ever did, because they just said, batteries released, shoot what you want. And the gunner's mates have been preparing for a week for this thing, and so they were like lifting weights and getting ready to be throwing those things in there. And we just let it rip with a 4.5, 5-inch gun, and it was every 30 seconds, boom, 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 just hitting it. And within 10 minutes, this thing's on fire, burning, and it's sunk, within 10 minutes. So even though they're only 5-inch guns, it was pretty neat exercise, super fun. It felt really good to be part of that. It was fun. So. I think after that, I wrote down a few things just to kind of remember what we did. But we took, I think it was about 3 weeks to deploy over to Scotland. And it was really just a short port call, and I don't even remember why we were there. I think it was probably just a foreign exchange, kind of a, hey, smile and wave at the folks over in Scotland. But we went up the North Sea and went through some 40-foot seas. That was pretty rough. And it's like you see in the movies. You climb up a wave, and then when the wave crests, the ship comes down and the bow hits and push spray across the side. And it's the most terrifying thing I've ever been part of. And it took a long time to get through there. The North Sea transit was probably a full day of that. It was pretty brutal. And we ended up cracking bits of the superstructure up here from that pounding. So there was actually a repair. We paid for that adventure, but it was neat. So later on in my slides, I have a picture of what the Faslane area looked like. But we drove up one of the locks. So the locks are very deep lakes up in Scotland, and we just took this ship 80 miles up a lock to Faslane. It's very cool. So. Those are kind of, and all in and amongst all of that, I'm learning how to drive the ship. So I lived a lot right up here. That's where the pilot house is. So learning how to drive, learning how to handle it, learning how to dock it, undock it, how to send radio communications to other ships so they know where you are, and all the stuff, the basic navigation and ship handling stuff. And at the end of that period before we actually deployed again, are you guys all familiar with Norfolk, Virginia? So it's a big, huge Navy base, but there's around the corner there's Little Creek, which is the amphib base for the Marines. So there's a big, what they call it's a high fleet concentration area, and when a hurricane comes in, they have to do something with the ships. They don't want them against the pier because the waves will batter the boat against the pier and destroy everything. So that do something means you got to go out to sea. So there was a hurricane that kind of changed course at the last minute. And I remember we all got, they actually had to test the system to recall everybody, and they brought us all back. And by far, the coolest thing I've ever done was this day when we all got underway for the hurricane. They call it a sortie. And 200 plus ships getting underway from Norfolk at the same time. So coming out of Norfolk were the aircraft carriers, submarines, cruisers, and destroyers. So we're all, one ship every 10 minutes getting underway. And then Little Creek, all the amphibs, and they just lit up all of those really small boats and the hovercrafts. Like everybody's just like, whew, just the whole fleet's assembling and going out to sea. And it reminded me of those pictures you see of the World War II era when everything is just kind of moving in the same direction. So that was just neat to be part of. But you can imagine, you're used to being just one boat out in the open ocean, and now you've got everywhere you look, you're 1,000 yards from somebody. It's terrifying. It's very scary because things happen very quickly at sea, and 1,000 yards is not enough spacing. But which is another story I'll have for you later. So anyway, that was kind of the first half of my career where I was a junior officer in engineering. Didn't really know much, and this is me learning the boat, learning how things work, and then et cetera. So I'm going to pause there. Anybody have questions about that period or anything you've heard so far? Anything you want to talk about?
Just that last
Please.
thing you said about do something.
Yeah.
Whenever we hear about a hurricane coming up the Atlantic coast, do folks do something?
I think they still get underway. I'm sure. Yeah. In the Navy, anyway. I think if you have a boat yourself, you can put yourself at risk if you have a small sailboat and you want to get out there in the ocean. But if you got a big, 9,600 ton cruiser, you just take it out and go around it. So I think that most of the time, it's at least the way it was explained to us. If you don't want the boats tied off to the pier because that's when accidents happen. That's when damage happens and all that. But you get out into the ocean. I mean, if we can make it to the North Sea, we can make it through any hurricane. So, That's how it felt to me in the back.
It's not only ships, it's also aircraft.
Mhm.
So,
Right.
Norfolk and Pensacola, which are susceptible to hurricanes, anything you can't hangar,
Yep.
you have to fly off. And I was involved in a couple fly-offs for hurricanes. But I do have a question about,
Please.
you cracked
Mhm.
the bow there.
No.
So what did that entail to repair? You have to go back to the yard?
I don't remember the actual repair. I don't. I don't know if it was in my timeline. I think this was after the yard period, but it may not have been. And I think what I remember is people coming out to look at it and it being a big point of discussion. They may have just left it and said it's not a danger. You know,
I think it would be under warranty or something.
Right. yeah. You just pull into Bath Ironworks, and then the guy comes out like, yeah, we'll cover that. Yeah. I wish. I don't know. I mean, there was so much going on. I remember that being just kind of a data point. Like, oh yeah, this was pretty hairy. You know. So I don't remember honestly, but my guess was there was probably some patchwork thing affected to change it. But up here, it's interesting because up here, you can't really tell, but these white lines, that's anchor chain, and underneath of that is the locker where the anchors get stored, and then there are, they call them wildcats, but they're huge winches. And one of the most dangerous pieces of gear on the ship is right up there because that's under so much tension, and it's such a powerful, motor that turns and picks up all that anchor chain. So having anything going wrong up there is never good. And that's kind of, if the wildcat's broken, your anchor's broken, and that means you don't get to pull into port. So huge, there was somebody was always laser focused on what's going on up there. So,
Yeah, Adrian?
yes.
Just looking at the structure, you would have tremendous amount of windage, it seems to me.
Yeah.
Just with the
Yeah.
structure. If you're out in the open ocean with heavy winds, aren't you a tremendous amount of rolling? And
Yeah.
pitch?
Yep. I mean, we would, the pitching and rolling, this picture kind of distorts it a little bit, but you're absolutely right. I mean, you would think if it's a big enough boat, you won't feel it, but this would get tossed around like a toy out there. And there, you would spend a lot, these are the bridge wings out here, and there's just sort of a little standing area. And it would get, with the wind and this and all of that, like it would get unsafe to stand out there. And they have inside the pilot house, when you're standing inside, there's a wire. And how are you guys with foul language in here? It's called the oh shit wire. And it goes across the inside, and that's where you hold on, when you are, pitching and rolling like this, because you got to have something to hold on to. So there's a big enough keel. You can't see it, obviously, it's underwater, but it's this red part under there. But yeah, I never saw the back of it, but it wouldn't have surprised me if the props came out of the water on some of those bigger, because it was just unbelievable. Yeah, the amount of pitching and rolling is, it's no good.
So generally, nobody is walking on the deck? Or on
No, most of the time there's stuff going on out there. Yeah. I mean,
So where do they hang on to if the ship?
you go inside, or you're just really careful. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And there would be, so part of the day would be a sea state briefing, right? And the sea state is ranked. Again, I'm too far. I don't remember how they ranked it, but let's say it's a scale from 1 to 10. So sea state 0 is the calmest, or 1 is the calmest, and then 10 is the worst. And you talk about that at your briefing in the morning. So then you know what work you need to get done and when it's unsafe to have people outside. So at some point, the officer of the deck, who's just sort of in charge of the daily safety of the ship, he'd say, hey, it's a sea state 5, you guys got to bring everybody in. So it's not like you just be out there alone, but if something had to get done, it has to get done. So no one's going to be hanging over the side painting on the day of the 10 sea state, but they might be fixing something outside on a sea state 5, you never know. Because waiting for that sea state one day is waiting a while, Yeah. But good question though. Yeah. And I've only ridden on an aircraft carrier a few times. I don't know how they handle. You might know a little bit better about what the pitching and rolling does on one of those, but
I've been on, we went around the south side of South Point of Africa.
Oh, sure, yeah.
The Enterprise.
Yep,
And
that's a good one.
It was pretty high sea state.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
You don't notice it in normal sea state. But in a rough sea state, you can feel it and see it.
Yeah.
And some even got seasick. So.
Yeah. I was seasick often.
Yeah.
Yep. I sure was.
Maybe another question.
Yes.
I'd always understood that high-intensity radar had very detrimental effects on people if you got the way it gets beamed. Did you
Yeah.
guys have to have any sort of monitoring for radiation exposure?
We didn't have monitoring that I'm aware of. We did have that danger. So, part of that safety briefing would be, if the radar is going to be on, you can't go what's called a loft. And so let me go back a slide, actually. So I think it's easier to see here. So you can see where they put the spy. This is I think at its most powerful, something like 6 megawatts or something, huge, just a massive amount of power. They used to say if you stuck a fishing pole out this window with a hot dog on it, you could you could cook the hot dog on it if you wanted to, because it's a giant microwave. But there's no way for you to get in front of these for the most part, because of where they're positioned. But these other ones up here and all that other stuff that's on the superstructure, absolutely, like the fire control radar is up there, and that's a very high power directed. So no, you wouldn't be. They would close off a lot of these. Like there's guys on there now because they're coming into port, but these would be closed. These would be closed. All that stuff would be closed to you, during the daily operations if those radars are running, and that's probably the only the only protection we all had. I mean, it was one of 10,000 daily dangers that we kind of had to take part in.
Yeah, we used to always worry about stray electrons. We used to call them stray electrons because even though the radar was pointed out, you have a certain amount of energy
Likely,
that
yeah.
escapes
Yeah.
the corners,
Yeah.
so to speak. And that was kind of what we were worried
Yep.
about. I don't think, when I was in the Navy, I don't think we ever did anything about it, but guys talked about it.
Yeah. Oh, we talked about it. Yeah, we talked about it for sure. I remember so they have during this period of my service, they have escape trunks, and I don't know why they call it a trunk. It's not really a trunk. It's a tube that will go down from an engine room. It's just a straight shot out to an open deck. And I don't remember exactly where they were, but some of them might have been around here, and it'll go all the way down into the bowels of the ship. So 20 decks down, and it's a good 30 or 40 feet to the top of this thing. And my boss, the chief engineer, was not real happy with me and my buddy John, so we had to go paint this thing. And so I'm in this chamber that's got one opening up here and one down here, and I think we had a box fan at the bottom, but we're in there with rollers painting this thing. And I remember taking my glasses off to wipe the paint off of the glasses, and they just fell apart in my hand because of the fumes from the the paint. And I thought, ooh, and we were also feeling a little loopy coming out of there. And I was like, yeah, I wonder how many years of my life I just shaved off doing that. But yeah, so things like this happen all the time. Yeah. Anyway, it's all good. Part of the privilege, I'd say. So.
Is the whole construction aluminum now, or is it still steel?
I think it's still steel. Yeah, ours was steel.
It's steel, but for a while there, we were building ships with aluminum stem structures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we gave those to England during the Balkan War, and much to the detriment, because some of those superstructures melted when they were hit by missiles.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Argentines.
That was the Exocet, right?
Yeah.
Back in the day. Yeah. So, okay.
They went back to steel then.
Yeah. Well, you've seen some of the collision pictures and the missile damage pictures. I mean, you'll still get peeled apart like an onion. It's the forces in play are so big that you think it's steel and it's solid, but it doesn't take anything at all to rend it. But okay, so that was the first part of my journey, and then somewhere in amongst there, I became good enough at driving the ship and handling it and reading charts and things that the captain asked me to become the navigator. So when this happens, normally in your career, you go from one ship to another ship, but if you get the privilege of being a navigator, you stay on board a cruiser, and so you get to have 3.5 years on the same ship. So that was my experience, and I became navigator. I don't remember when, probably 2004-ish, sometime around there. And so that was kind of my job. My job came out of the engine room and up into the the top part of the ship here, and it was basically responsible for anywhere we went. It was my duty to plan the journey, make sure it was a safe transit, be the best driver on board, know all the rules of the road, all that sort of thing, so that there was always kind of somebody with continuity of knowledge of how to drive this particular ship and how it's going to handle and all that stuff. So it was pretty, I was very honored to have the job. It was certainly a wonderful job to have. You get to be part of a lot of things that as a junior officer you don't normally get included in. You get to brief the captain every day. You have to go in and visit this gentleman and tell him what you're going to do and give him a weather update and a track update. So it's a lot of responsibility, and it's pretty fun. And it was kind of as the ship was gearing up for our actual deployment, which was, in this case, transit to the Mediterranean, through the Suez Canal, out the Red Sea, and then into the Arabian Gulf. So that was our deployment. And the first part of that was a pretty neat little trip up the York River. So there's a naval weapons station in Yorktown, which, if you haven't been there, put that on your list to go to. There's so much history in Virginia anyways, but this, the history of Yorktown goes all the way back to the history of America. And just to drive a ship up the York River and then pull in, and that's where we got our Tomahawks and Standard missiles and things. Just an awesome, an awesome experience. You're looking at, mansions that had the cannonball holes in the side of them from the bombardments back in the Revolutionary War. So it's a pretty special place. It's very neat. But that's where we took on all of our weapons. So we didn't drive around normally with any missiles at all. If we're just driving around out in Virginia, we wouldn't have anything in the VLS. But for a deployment, you go up and you collect your Tomahawks and you collect your Standard missiles there. So we did that, and then just straight shot across to the Straits of Gibraltar, which is an interesting experience. That's a very high traffic area, and you've got traffic going in and out of it, and you've got traffic going across it from Morocco and Spain. So it's this nexus of just boats everywhere. It's very very hair raising, very blood pressure inducing. But that was a good experience. The Mediterranean is a wonderful place to be. Also very highly trafficked. We stopped in Suda Bay, Crete, which is just above North Africa there. It technically belongs to Greece, but when you're there, it feels more like Morocco or Northern Africa. And then we stopped in Naples, Italy. Big fleet concentration area over there. I think the head of the Mediterranean fleet is still there. And then from there, it was the Suez Canal.
Was all this as a single ship, or were you part of a larger group?
We would travel together, but then we kind of split up when we got to the Med. So we traveled across. We did the Gibraltar trip together, and then not everybody went to Suda Bay. Like us and the carrier, we pulled into Suda Bay, and I think everybody else got to go somewhere. I don't remember if it was Rota or something else, but not everybody went all together. But then we would kind of form up when we were driving, and in and amongst that transit, we're doing things together like anti-submarine warfare. We're taking on the helicopters, and they're going out and they're doing their exercises. We would do things like learn how to drive, 5 ships abreast at 1,000 yards apart. So we do that all day and just drive like that. And nowadays, you can call somebody up and say, "Hey, let's do this." That's not how it works out in the open seas. You have to send a message to tell a ship what you're doing. So you have a radio message that you prepare and you read and you look at and make sure that it's safe, and then you transmit that message, and that tells the ship that's 1,000 yards from you exactly what you're going to do. We're going to get back to that because there's an important story there. But you can imagine, like if you're driving a car in your lane and you put your blinker on, you come over to your other lane, everybody can kind of react if you do that. It's mostly understood and expected, that lane merges are going to happen. But when you're in the open ocean, nobody has any idea what anybody's doing. And if my experience is like anybody else's, you could have 1,000 miles of ocean to your left, 500 miles of ocean to your right, I guess, either way. And if there's one other boat out there that's 200 miles away, he's coming right at you every time, and it might not be today that you're going to collide, but if you don't change course, in 5 days you're going to hit every time. So the point of Navy ships operating together is that you have to be able to tell unequivocally your neighbor and the rest of the group you're operating with what you're going to do. Because if you make a turn and nobody's ready for it, you're going to plow right into the side of somebody. So a lot of that is done with a message and a timed message that, like, at the top of the hour, we will do this, that sort of thing. Do you have a question?
certain rules of the road, though.
Oh, yeah.
that
Yep.
you have to abide by,
Yep.
operating close in.
Absolutely.
So, how many ships in your group?
This is the destroyer squadron, so probably 10 of us. And periodically, depending on who else was out there, we'd join up with another one, so there might be 20. So most of the time, though, on our way over to the Arabian Gulf, there were about between 5 and 10 of us just kind of doing stuff together. And one of the, for example, one of the things that was becoming hot, because this was just after the towers fell, so there was a lot of anti-terrorist stuff going on. And there are civilian ships out there, tankers that carry liquid natural gas, LNG tankers. And these were just a huge risk point for the Navy. So whenever one would get underway from anywhere, we'd track it. Like, hey, you guys have a LNG ship coming through your neck of the woods. So sometimes we'd follow those things just to make sure that no terrorists were after it, that kind of thing. So we'd be 5 together, then somebody would break off to do that and come back, or we'd break off to go look at something else. So it was kind of this loose collection of ships, all the way over. And then when you get to things like the Suez, you kind of condense everybody together. It's a risk point for everybody, so we all did the Suez together. Probably a cost savings in there somewhere too, hopefully. But
One thing about the Mediterranean is it's actually a big lake.
it is, yeah.
And there's a lot of restrictions. And,
Yep.
so
Yeah.
It's hard for a large group to operate.
For sure. Yeah, you don't have space, but yeah, too.
In your transit from, let's say, again, Chesapeake Bay to the Persian Gulf,
Mm-hmm.
how many times would you have to refuel?
Many. About every 4 days. Yeah, and that I don't know that that's how many we had to, but that's how many we did. And it was, everything is done on a qualification system. So there's always a ticker that says every month you have to do these 10 exercises. And usually you had to do it every week anyway. So we unrepped all the time. And that exercise was called unrep for underway replenishment. And that's when the tanker pulls up alongside of you, and you throw some stuff over to them, they throw some stuff over to you, you take on fuel, you get the mail, break away, every 4 or 5 days, all the time. Yeah, we did that a lot. And we
Then maybe start using the term to drive the ship. I mean, I see drive the tank. But I always thought pilot it or
It's slang. It's
Yeah.
a ship driver.
Yeah, it is definitely slang. That's yeah. Well, piloting, piloting has a specific definition in the Navy too, though. Piloting is that it's that sort of last, like they call last mile delivery, right? It's the last little bit as you pull into a port. That's piloting, and you're not really sailing. I don't know. It's a good question. Yeah, we just called it ship driving.
Talk a little bit about getting qualified as officer. of the
Sure.
deck.
Yeah.
That's really the ship driver, right?
Yep. So no, it's good. So officer of the deck, that's your main job as an officer on a ship, is to be the officer of the deck. And as you can imagine, you're out to sea, 24 hours a day. So you don't just turn everything off at night and let the ship float around. Someone's got to drive it. So somebody's driving this thing. Somebody's the officer of the deck 24 hours a day. And to get there, you have to get, when you first report, you don't know anything. So you have to get from, I don't know anything, to I can handle the ship for my 5-hour watch, as quickly as possible. And so there's a qualification program. And, it's a holistic knowledge of the ship. So you start learning about the engines and how the engines work, how much power they need, how to use them. We also, in addition to those gas turbines that drive it, they have it's a controllable pitch propeller. So the blade can rotate like this and like that and add more or less power. So you have to learn all the systems, right? You have to learn how the water gets converted, where the wastewater goes, how the boiler generates steam, how the boiler generates fresh water, how all of these systems work, because you're not only responsible for driving it during the day, but you're just responsible for its operation. So if the engineering plant has to shut down for an hour to clean something or to do something, you have to slot that into the daily activities, and that's your job. So the qualification process usually takes, I want to say you start you start as what they call the junior officer of the deck, which is a nice way of saying, yeah, flunky, basically. Yeah, I was going to use a worse word, but I appreciate you helping me out there. Yes, exactly. Yes, someone's got to hold the pencil, as it were. So yeah, you start as a nobody, and you're learning how to read radars. You're learning how to read charts. You're learning how to. It's becoming sort of a lost art. But when I mentioned before how there's always a ship coming at you, well, surprisingly often that is the case. And I think because merchant shipping lanes just probably tend to follow the same directions that we're going, but you have to learn how to manage moving bodies in 3 dimensions and 2 dimensions. So there's a little bit of geometry and a little bit of other stuff, and they created a tool called a maneuvering board, and you're literally, you plot where things are on a maneuvering board, and you change the course of your ship to avoid collisions. And that's how it was done back in World War II, back in the day before that, for years and years and years. And now that we had GPS and things like that, it's just easy to say, oh no, we're good, then you just use the GPS. But there was an art form to it. And the captains, they have had years and years of experience using these things, but basically, because things happen so slow, you need to plan out your day of driving. And the captain will say in his standing orders, his instructions to the officer of the deck, like, I don't ever want the Monterey to be any closer than 3 miles to any other ship. And that's a hard job sometimes if there's 50 ships around you. So you have to find a way to maneuver the ship through all that. But back to the qualification thing, I think you would expect to spend something on the order of 6 months to a year learning each system and getting qualified and talking with the more experienced officers, and they sign off, whether or not you actually know something, and you take tests and all that stuff. And then eventually you graduate from junior officer of the deck to officer of the deck, and then you're fully fledged, contributing member of society, as they say, and you can actually, do the work of managing the ship. And, it's a lot. You're doing a lot. You're communicating professionally to other Navy ships. You're representing the Navy, on the high seas. You're making sure that breakfast gets served on time. All that stuff, and it's a pretty big, pretty big responsibility, I'd say. But that's your job. That's your main job as an officer, is making that, being the responsible party up there. So did that answer your question, or?
Yeah, and it's a career. I mean, you have to have it.
Yeah.
You have to get it if you want to make a Navy any kind of a career.
Yep.
We had aviators that would go through the program as officer of the deck on a carrier just because they knew they wanted to progress in their career path.
Yeah.
They had to have that qualification.
Yep, and I think aren't the officers of the deck on a carrier? They're pilots, right? Yeah.
Well, no.
No? Oh, maybe not. Okay.
But yes and no. For instance, a navigator, I think, is usually a pilot or an NFO.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure. I don't think the officer of the deck is always a pilot.
Okay. Well, I think they can be. My story about plane guard. You're going to love this one. I'll try to get to it quick here. Okay. So we went through the Suez Canal. There's not that much to talk about with the Suez Canal. It's just a 10-hour drive through a very narrow channel, but not terribly dangerous or exciting. And then you just sort of shoot down the Red Sea. I think you got Jordan on one side and Egypt on the other for a while. So
when you go through a narrow channel, restricted like that,
Mm-hmm.
you have guys positioned on either side with
Oh, yeah.
guns and everything.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So in this case, what's interesting about the Suez is that you have to pay. I think Egypt owns it, so you have to pay into the Egypt's transit system. And obviously, we would stand up a force protection detail all around the ship, but you would take on an Egyptian pilot. So he comes on and literally spends the next 14 hours sleeping in the captain's chair, because when you're in a channel like that, hydrodynamically speaking, it's not very dangerous. There's a cushion of water on either side of you, and you'd have to try to hit the side of the canal. So it's really you just follow the track and get through it. It's very, very easy. No pilot really required, but I think the international relations part of it takes over a little bit, and they this is a source of revenue for these guys, and he brings his whole family on board, and they try to sell you things, and they extort you for cigarettes and deodorant. Like,
It's a union job.
yeah, it's a union job, exactly. Yeah, the thing I remember most, they wanted deodorant and cigarettes, so they cleaned us out. They cleaned out the ship's store of deodorant and cigarettes. I remember that.
So what did you get? Rugs and all sorts of stuff?
Oh no, this is not the rugs yet. This is this is I got watches over here, and I got fake cologne over here. So this was the low budget, because they could, it was what you could carry over on a boat. The rugs came later, but yeah, this was just small, penny ante stuff. But yes.
Can you speak to the part on your paper about the pirates that you assisted in?
So that wasn't me. I wasn't on board then, unfortunately. But I do know. So there were, especially at the time when I was in, there were a lot of Ivory Coast pirates, is the term we used for it. I don't think they use it anymore. It's I don't know what it is now. But anyway, same type of deal. And every now and then somebody would peel off to go help out with those. And if you remember the one. Where the sniper was on the cruiser. Yeah. I think that the Monterey was involved in that somehow. I don't exactly know how, but those were cruisers and destroyers from my Desron. I was long gone by then, but they were involved in it. So unfortunately, that wasn't a mission that we ever did. And the good and bad of being the air defense coordinator, the good was. There probably wasn't any. The bad was that we always had to go where the aircraft carrier went. So we would never be the boat that peels off to go do the cool thing, because we had to stay there and provide air cover for the Harry S. Truman. And I say it's not so good sometimes because it's easy for another country to say, yeah, bring your frigate in, bring your destroyer in, but it's not easy for another country to say, yeah, bring that big old aircraft carrier in. So we were stuck with them. So wherever they were allowed to pull in, that's where we were allowed to pull in. So that's why we got Suda Bay, Crete, and Naples, as opposed to Rhodes or we've got Rhodes later, but Rota, Spain, or some of the other more slightly attractive ports. But such is life. Small price to pay. So. So anyways, long story short, in the Suez, not very exciting. You get a little antsy because you're very close to land, and of course, on either side, there's always an armored personnel carrier following you with a bunch of guys with an AK-47, but by and large, not terribly dangerous. Ships do that all day, all the time. So when we finally did get to the Arabian Gulf, we spent the majority of our time doing two jobs, mainly the air defense for the Harry S. Truman Battle Group, and mainly plane guard for the Harry S. Truman itself. And so I'll just show you a couple of cool pictures. I unfortunately do not have as many as I wanted to, but this is taken from my ship, and you're looking at the carrier deck of the Harry S. Truman, and we're actually doing an unrep with them. So they're giving us fuel this time. So we've got connected with hoses, and the lateral separation is about 300 feet, I think, something like that. And we're doing probably 8 or 9 knots right now. So 2 ships, one of them huge, one of them tiny in comparison, 300 feet apart. Pretty cool. So that's a bunch of those planes. That's a Tomcat, right? Yeah, there's a Tomcat on the deck. And that's how close. That's no zoom on my camera. That's just, it was right there. Yeah, pretty wild. And we're on, this is taken from on the deck of my ship. A little bit more from a different angle there. And you can see how big these carriers are. I mean, they got cars that drive around on there. It's outrageous. Yeah. And there she is, CVN 75. And then, yeah, and you're right. So, yeah, that's the fuel line that would connect, just to the back end of my ship. So you could see how just massive it is to have a ship that big right next to you. Like you can reach out and touch it just about. That's how it feels.
How long did it take to refuel? I mean, that doesn't look like a very big hose.
Yeah, it's not. It's not. Yeah, we would usually hook up a couple of them, but I think most of the time, an hour or two is all it really took. Yeah. And I think that frequency is part of that. Like, we didn't really drain our tank, you know?
You never let them run down.
Yeah.
You're always topping off, you're keeping it
Yeah.
topped
Yeah.
off as much as possible.
Cool.
Well, that's even good for exercise.
Yeah. Yeah. And this one is, I talked about Faslane earlier. This is Scotland. So this is one of the locks, and we drove up, you know, all the way up the lock and docked here. And Faslane is a submarine base that is maintained in the UK there. So I think that's everything I have picture-wise.
How long would you stay there?
Faslane?
Yeah.
2 days. Yeah, we were gone in 2 days. Yeah, that was a short one. Most of our, I can't remember a port call being more than 3 days. Yeah, they just, I think, oh no, sorry, Bahrain was more than 3 days. I think we were there for almost 2 weeks because we had to make repairs. So there was a part for our gas turbine that we didn't have. Yeah, okay, so those are, that's all the, unfortunately, all the pictures I have. We'll leave you with a cool one here. But yeah, so when we got to the Arabian Gulf, air defense coordinating and plane guard. So I just wanted to talk a minute about plane guard because it's such an outrageous thing that it's hard for people to understand, but it was very stressful and it was a big responsibility for our ship, but just incredibly stressful on everybody. And I'll tell you why. So my terrible drawing here is meant to be the Harry S. Truman here and the Monterey here. And the concept behind plane guard, as the pilots in the room will know, is the planes will come and land on the deck of this aircraft carrier, and if all things go well, they land and everything's good. If things don't go well, they might fall off the back of this thing. So the idea of a plane guard person, it can be a ship or a helicopter, is that we're right there to pick up this pilot if he falls in. That's the whole idea. So 1,000 yards of separation is typically what we would shoot for. So we would go 1,000 yards and just to the right or just to the left. I'm backwards, but you know what I mean? Like either side, depending on operations. And all day we would stay right here, 1,000 yards away from the ship. And it's terrifying because Monterey has 2 screws. Not bad. This thing's got 4, and it can accelerate and decelerate and turn much more nimbly than we ever could. So, yeah, and part of it was designed that way for maneuverability because pilots need to have certain winds, right? So that they need to have a wind coming across the deck in a certain way so that they can take off and land safely. And so, all day in the Arabian Gulf, the Truman would drive up 20 miles, spin around, drive back 20 miles, drive up 20 miles, and do this endlessly just because they wanted to create the right wind for launching and landing planes. All day long they would do this. So all day long, somebody had to follow them and do this. And it's hard enough when you just want to maintain that 1,000-yard separation because if they're going 1 knot faster than you're closing at a certain rate, and then before you know it, you're 500 yards away and you can't stop fast enough and all those things. So it would be like tailgating somebody right on somebody's bumper to liken it to how you would drive.
How fast would you be going?
Sometimes 20 knots, yeah. Sometimes all out. Like sometimes we could, remember I said we could maybe get 24 knots? Sometimes they would go 26 and we just couldn't keep up. I mean, it was, and that wasn't even their top end speed. They're just like, well, we got a little more in the tank there, and
That carrier can go a little faster.
it can, yeah. And they would, and it was, because their mission was always kind of, the more important one, which is to get the planes, on and off the deck. So we just had to.
Plus, if it's very hot, you have a lot less lift on your wings.
Probably, yeah, I would imagine, yeah. So, and then the winds shift, they can shift hourly in these things. So where this gets interesting.
It's also a direction, because let's say you're going east toward the Med or the Atlantic, but you're running flight operations.
Yeah.
Well, depending on the winds, you may have to turn 180 degrees.
Yeah, that's where it gets
to
interesting.
use the winds for landing aircraft. Then you want to continue east, so you got to turn while the aircraft are airborne. They turn back to the east.
Yes,
And I can see where you guys would be really tough. I never thought about that.
I'm glad you brought this up. So remember all those qualifications you asked me about and all that stuff? Part.
If a plane crashed, either, just short of the stern or whatever, could you stop fast enough? I mean, you're chugging away.
Good question. Probably. Yeah.
But you could reverse
Yeah.
your screws, right?
We could, but that's not how we would do it. So you could not stop in 1,000 yards, but the whole idea of recovering somebody who's in the water has been pretty well developed. So what you would do is they'd peel one way, and you would do a big turn like this and come around and put your broadside to the part of the ocean where he fell in. That's how you do it. And because you could swing this thing around in probably a minute, depending on how it goes. So that's the idea, right? And if they're going slow enough, sure, you pick them up. But there was a man overboard drills. We did those sometimes 2 times a day. So however that situation would present, there would be a playbook for it. But the main thing, the reason I even drew this was because what happens when, just like you said, when the wind shift and they need to turn 180 degrees, is this officer of the deck, this guy up here, sends a message to this officer of the deck, and he says, winds are changing, so I am going to go right, change my course 180 degrees, pick back up at 20 knots, going on this new course. And all the information gets to him, and he says, oh, okay, so I know they're going to be turning right. So if they're going to be turning right at a certain time, then my maneuver to compensate for that is, if he goes like this, whoop, then I go like this. I go way wide, way all the way around like that, whoop, and then I pick him back up over here. That's what's supposed to happen. Now, in the daytime, not a big deal. At night, huge deal, because at night, this just looks like a sea of lights, and there is a little port and starboard light on there, but oftentimes you're so close that you don't see that starboard light, or it just gets lost in a plane taking off or whatever, or it's dark, or it's misty, whatever. But anyway, so this guy here at night has lost his ability to know what 1,000 yards really looks like, and has lost the ability to really understand what's happening without that message. So there was a night. Where the message came. I don't remember exactly the whole circumstance around it, but there was a miscommunication from here to here, and truthfully, we weren't 1,000 yards that night. I think we were 2,000 yards, so I had a little bit of breathing room. But what ended up happening was I was on this side, and I thought, for whatever reason, that this was going to happen. But what actually was happening was this. So what's happening, remember that they've got four screws. So what they'll do is they'll put 2 going forward and 2 going aft, and they'll spin sort of in place like that. And when that happens, that sea of lights just keeps looking like a sea of lights. And you can't tell what's going on because they're spinning in place and you can't really tell. And if I want to turn, I got to go one way or the other, and it's obvious, but they just do this. And then, so I'm preparing my maneuver, which of course is going to be like this. So we're just, getting ready to do a nice, broadside here. And at the point where nothing was making sense, and I was getting closer, and I wasn't supposed to be getting closer, I actually called the captain up. I woke him up at like 2 or 3 in the morning. I was like, Captain, you got to get up here. I don't know what's going on. And he came up, and it was as close as that at night, I swear, when we finally sorted it out. And he came up and helped me out, and we just kind of we sounded the collision alarm and everything, and just grazed the back of it, And
You actually grazed it?
no, well, I mean, we did not. No, there was no contact. I mean, for me, like, yeah, we didn't trade paint. That did happen, but not to me. So we did. Yeah, we just. I mean, as close can be, and it was the most terrifying. I don't even know, half hour of my life. And you're just trying to, so your adrenaline's going, you're trying to sort this mess out, and the captain's like, okay, everybody all right? I'm going back to bed. So he goes to bed, and the next morning there was an apology message from the Truman to the Monterey because they messed it up and almost killed everybody. But it was like vindication for me because I was like, I'm not that bad, like I know what I'm doing. But no, it was. So that's something, I mean, and we did this every day, all day, many times, and it was just a terrifying, but that's how quickly, and it happened so fast, it happened very quickly.
Recently, there was a couple episodes of collisions
Mm-hmm.
with US naval ships at sea. Is that kind of what happened to these guys? I mean, to the guys that recently happened to.
I don't think so.
There's some elements that are the same,
Yeah.
but we actually had Lynn Albee, who's a retired Navy captain,
Ah,
did a talk here
Oh, cool.
about the two collisions in Japan. And there were some elements to the same,
Yeah.
but not quite. They were in a narrow barrel in Tokyo Bay on one of them, and you weren't keeping track of the surrounding.
yeah, a lot of traffic too, right?
And they were going the wrong way in a one-way corridor.
Yeah.
That helps.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
So there were a lot, but it was officer of decks.
It was off to the deck, yeah. At
There was
night.
a screw up
Yeah.
on the officer of decks.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah.
This is very enlightening.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's very mundane, I think, and most people don't think about it, but like someone out there right now is probably doing plane guard. And when the helicopters did it, it was great. You know, we could just camp out and do nothing, but when we had to do it, it was tough.
Well, I was going to say also, you had radar plots though, on the bridge, right, that you could track the ship's movements. Could you not, or is it happening too fast?
Well, we did, but at 1,000 yards, like the radar plot's a blob, and when it's spinning like that, it's still a blob. And it's a good point though, because part of the reason you send that message is the message that we got did not match what was happening here. So we're prepping, and you have to prepare, right? So we're prepping to make our course change and doing that, and the message that said they were going to turn. Now the radar's showing them doing this, and they're doing this, and that's where the problem is, because you don't know what's going on, and like your sources of information are supposed to agree. But it's a good point about the radar plot, because in addition to this operation, you got all kinds of other stuff too, right? You have other ships that might be coming. A ship that might be coming this way, it's not going to hit them, but it might hit you, you know. And you're out in the Arabian Gulf where fishing boats are everywhere, right? So you have that danger, and then you also have the little islands that might be scattered around in here. We actually inadvertently invaded Iran one night because the officer of the deck was trying to get winds to launch our helo, and he wasn't paying attention to the map, and he's heading directly at Farsi Island, which is this little, they got a radar base and a missile site stuck on the middle of this island, and he kind of just lost track of what he was doing and just headed straight for it. And at I think 12 nautical miles was the limit, so at the 11th nautical mile inside Farsi Island, the guys over here called us up and said, Monterey, what's your position, over? And then, you know, all hell breaks loose because we just invaded another country. So that happened. Probably happens a lot, but. And then we actually did trade paint. This was a sad story. When we were doing an underway replenishment with another ship, we were routine alongside as normal. And if you remember back to earlier in the talk when I was talking about Smart Ship, so Smart Ship was that drive-by-wire control system, still pretty new on my ship, very, very buggy, by far not 100% successful at that point. And one of the things that it would periodically do is it would take over control from the bridge and return control of the engines into the engine room and just kind of switch it back up. Usually not a problem. Like it would happen very quickly and nobody would notice it, or it wouldn't be a problem. But we're side by side with another ship, and what happened? Boom! Control gets shifted back to the engine room, and so the officer of the deck is giving orders. The orders aren't going anywhere because he doesn't have control of the engines, but he doesn't know that. And you're going, I wish I remember exactly. Let's say you're going 10 knots. It's not very fast. Things don't happen very quickly at 10 knots. So he thinks he's telling the engine to go a little faster. It's not. So we're drifting back a little bit further. We're drifting back a little bit further. And then finally, when he realizes that something is definitely wrong, they figure things out. And then the guy down in the engine room he guns the engine. So now we pull ahead like this and pulls ahead too far. So now we're too far ahead of the Spica. And they, instead of slowly bringing it back into position, which is what you're supposed to do, somebody panicked. I don't remember who. And by panicked, I mean they went all stop. And all stop will definitely slow you down, but it also stops moving water across the rudder, which if you don't have water moving across the rudder, it doesn't do anything. So they went all stop. So now the blades are basically stopping and they're creating all this turbulence back there, and the rudder becomes effectively useless. And we went bloop, just tapped them just a little bit, and then everything went back to normal. We did an emergency breakaway, but
By the
and you just described with the smart ship, with the smart.
Yeah.
And there was, and I can't remember, you remember that? Adrian Hovey said that he had really researched it, and there had been a miscommunication with or they had shut something down between the deck, the cross to the deck, and the engine room, so they weren't.
Oh, that was aft steering. Yeah.
Yeah, aft steering.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
it. It was
Yep.
after steering. Anyway, and that was part of the problem.
Yeah.
The ship wasn't doing what they were
Yeah.
supposed to be doing, so.
Yep. And
The engine weren't supposed to be.
Yep, and it happened so fast. And the sad part about that was, I mean, there was obviously a training component, right, that contributed to that collision. There was also a mechanical component, and they let our captain, maintain his captaincy for a couple of months, but eventually he got relieved of command early. Tends to be the case, yeah. So that was our ignominious end. I think that was on the way home from deployment too. And then, yeah. So that's pretty much it. I could keep going, I guess, but I think the bulk of it is kind of there. Please.
Did you ever feel your life was in danger?
Yeah, that night. Yeah, that night for sure, And there were times. It's funny you mentioned that there were no serious incidents on deployment on my ship, not even a broken leg. 6+ months operating. A couple of people got the flu or something, but other than a cut or two, like there was no serious injury, which is one. It's a testament to the safety program in place. We actually had far more serious incidents in port, for various reasons. But the actual day-to-day, when you're in the skin of the ship, doesn't feel dangerous. But as soon as you just kind of look into the ocean, that's when it gets very scary. And we would do. Can't see him. I don't even know if you can see him on any of these pictures. But we had. That's a lifeboat, but somewhere in there, I think that after this picture was taken, they're no longer lifeboats like that. They're RIBs, rigid hull inflatable boats. So it looks like that Zodiac boat you guys have all seen, and pulled about 12 people, and there was a submission going on with, they called it maritime interdiction. And if a boat was suspected of smuggling oil from somewhere, right, they would send a couple of those off of a cruiser, guys with machine guns and shotguns. You'd board this other ship and kick down doors and see if they're actually smuggling anything. We never got to do any of that, but we did put those boats out on the open ocean, and that was very scary. To be in the open ocean in a boat that small was quite scary. But the life-threatening night, that was the only time where I was like, oh, cool, man, we could have been bad. So.
Captain's gig or a captain's boat?
No, not ours.
I guess the carrier.
Yeah.
A lot of times, the carrier can't tie up alongside
Right.
up here or anything, and so they're at anchor out, and so the captain has his own boat.
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't have anything that cool.
Bar to the captain's
Yeah. No. So yeah, I think opening up to more questions. That's kind of the organized part.
You used an expression that was part of the privilege.
Ah.
And you said, I was very honored to have that job. Could you talk a minute about part of the privilege?
Sure. I think that was talking about becoming the navigator.
I took it as your overall service.
Yeah, I guess the privilege for me, it all started with just the opportunity to be able to go to college, have that education paid for, with the idea that you're going to serve the country and do that. But I think the privilege is, it means many different things to me. But what I've taken from it as a 40-year-old man now is that it's the privilege of trust and service that you get at 20, 21, or 22 that exists nowhere else that I've ever seen. I mean, this was a momentous thing for me to be, to almost collide with another ship, but also to live through it and learn from it and develop some kind of skill in leadership or skill in life to be able to navigate these kind of things. And so the privilege really is that somebody's giving you, not somebody, but when you serve, you get given this gift, and the gift is your experience far exceeds the level of danger, level of responsibility, level of commitment, passion, all those things than most other people at that age, right? And that sets you up so well later on in life, because then if you can make it through that, the difficulty, painting an escape chunk and having your glasses fall apart in your hand, like if you can make it through all those things, there's not really much else that you can't do in life. And that's how I've come to view it, is it's just prepared me so much for that. So that's some of what comes to mind anyways when I talk about privilege. Does that answer your question? No. Cool. You bet.
What challenges did you face when you finally transitioned? What kind of guidance did you have to other young in the civilian world?
Sure, it's the double-edged sword, just what we were talking about. So you're ready for all that stuff, and you have that experience. And in today's world, there's people don't talk about this. I don't know why, or maybe they do, and I'm just not paying attention. But when I joined, I was working with an incredibly diverse crew. We had black people, we had Latino people, we had women, we had everybody on that ship, and we all had to work together. And you get experience doing that, working with people from disparate backgrounds and all those things. And then when you get out, you crave that level of responsibility, and you can operate at a high level. And it's a challenge. It's very difficult then coming into civilian world where your skill is not immediately translatable into a job, that a civilian can understand. So there is a struggle where you're looking for that same, that same esprit de corps, that same, feeling of being part of something important. And it's hard. It takes a while to find that, and you may never find it. I don't know that I've ever found, companionship and colleagues like I want to have in the Navy, and I think you just may not have that, and that's probably okay. But as far as advice, I think the best thing you can do is stay in touch with all the people that you served with and other people that you served with, because there are people out there who look to hire vets and want to have veterans as part of their teams and all these things, and they understand you better than the average civilian. So keep that network alive. Where possible, don't turn your back on other people, regardless of your experience. Mine was good and bad. Some people had a horrible time. Some people had a great time. But don't close that door, would be my advice to other vets out there. Keep the door open.
So along the same lines, I will now do a shameless plug.
Yes.
The Veterans Museum,
Absolutely.
Which is a group of mostly veterans, and we get that esprit de corps back that we've not had since the military. Also, veterans organizations, American Legion, VFW, Vietnam Veterans, a lot of veterans organizations. And those organizations, along with the museum, do help transition a veteran from military into civilian life, and able to maintain some of those relationships.
Yep. It's very. Don't
That's my shameless plug.
No, it's a great plug. It's a great plug. It's part of it's having a safe place. Having been around people who get it. So no, it's a wonderful thing. Happy to be here. Talking to you guys today. It's been great. I haven't thought about all these things in an organized way in a long time. So, and sometimes it feels good to get it off your chest too if you did have a tough time. So yeah, please. Cool. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Adrian? Well, we'd like to give you one of our challenge coins. You probably
thank you.
had several.
Yeah.
But think of us.
Awesome,
And
I
we'd love
will.
to get you back. And especially, we have a great interest to see what we could do to better help, our younger veterans who are transitioning
Sure.
back into the local community. So
I'm
we're
happy to
looking
help,
That'd be great.
Awesome.
So
Let's be safe. Let's sanction.
Thank you
Awesome.
again.
Yes, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. You bet.